Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Northern Showcase. We look forward to spending the next hour with you. I'm Peniola Renshaw, a former stage manager, now Webflow developer in Trenton, Ontario, and I handle communications for No Code North.
Hi, I'm Maggie Moncio. I'm a Webflow developer based in Toronto with a background in film and television. In our No Code North group, I take care of our designs and our gather space.
And I'm Jeremy LaRue, a visual developer from Vancouver and creator of Country Everywhere, a directory and community hub for BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and disabled folks in country music. On the No Code North team, I am the resident automations guy and the runner of the streams.
Our mission at No Code North is twofold. First, to build a community of Canadian Webflowers and no-code enthusiasts, and second, to showcase Canadian talent to the rest of the world. We host workshops, demos, and panel discussions on Fridays at noon Eastern in our lodge, which is our cool gather space. And once a month, we host the Northern Showcase right here on our YouTube channel. And we have lots of folks joining us today. It's great to see. Hello, Nancy. Hi, Dale. Patrick's here. Yasaman, I don't think we've seen you here before. Welcome. If you have any questions, then just put them in the chat and we'll either ask them during the interview or at the end.
Stephen O'Grady is a product manager and no-code, low-code architect based in Kelowna, BC. With over 15 years working with brands, agencies, and companies like RBC, Hootsuite, I'm so bad at pronouncing that one, 8020, Shadow Creative Studios, Continuum and Airtable. He is the co-founder of Podcast Delivery, a podcast curation site and newsletter, and has his own blog, WTF No Code, where he shares his unfiltered thoughts and also useful tips about the no-code space. Please help us welcome Stephen to the Northern Showcase.
Hey,
Welcome.
Steven.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Actually, Maggie, it's funny. Hootsuite has been, its origins is actually based on Hootsuite. So that might be the trick next time.
Yeah, it's like it's a francophone problem. Some like double O is always an issue, I feel like.
Yeah.
Like the
It's okay. We can ask Jeremy and Penny to pronounce Midfay.
Yeah.
Milfay?
What? Milfay?
I find that Anglos sometimes have a problem doing the lots of vowels, double L.
Yeah, that is a tricky one. All right, cool. Hey, and it was great. We got to meet in person last year when I was in Vancouver, and you and Jeremy have had a number of meetups together, which is terrific. It's so nice when we can actually start getting people together in person.
Yeah, I love those meetups, especially the ones that were downtown in the thick of things on a Friday evening. It got me out of the house, which was nice. But you know, moving away from the city and the central hubs, it's a little disappointing to not be able to tap into that so frequently. But another reason to get back to the big smoke one day.
Yeah.
How is the move going? So, because for those that don't know, you just recently moved out of Vancouver and you're in Kelowna now.
I fled. I turned. Like I can't be here anymore. Drove 5 hours down the highway. It's great. I've been. It's been about 6 weeks, so I'm settled to some degree here, and it's calming. It's really just an entirely different pace. So I'm appreciating that. It's there's still a lot to discover. Winter's going to settle in soon, and people in Canada know this. Vancouver never really has winters. It kind of gets down to, I don't know, 10 degrees at the lowest Celsius. But the fact that I need a snow shovel again is I guess that's okay. But it's
the only workout I get in the winter is snow shoveling.
Oh yeah, I get that. Well, just I'm actually thinking of a snowblower at this point, just so I don't have to bend. But it's a welcome change. I think at the end of the day, that's the headline that sticks out in my mind. Ask me again in 6 months.
Sounds good. Excellent. Well, I guess we'll jump into and get things going here. So we want to touch on a little bit about your background. And so you grew up back east, correct?
Yeah, born and raised in Montreal. So growing up there it was a treat. I mean, real winters, like I said, needing to own that snow shovel, learning how to pile up snow high growing up came naturally. But I guess the point there is that I left that at some point. I was early on in my career, to the point where I wouldn't really call it a career. That first job became the second one. You got to understand some of the interests that you had. One of my first jobs was working at Best Buy, where I just got to tinker with other people's computers. And the thing that kind of stayed constant throughout was just this curiosity. That curiosity didn't take me all that far when I worked at RBC for 4 years. I got to learn that there are types of organizations that require a hefty standard operating procedure. But the learnings working at RBC were actually incredible. The network of people that I was able to come away with was great. It took me quite some time to realize that there were people in my corner, because I was young. I was like 19, 20, 21, trying to get a foothold in an industry and what could amount to a career that would be, lucrative and positive and all the things that I thought were necessary. You're kind of told, hey, this is a good job, take this job and run with it. Little did I know that there was so much more in the job market and so much more that could line up with some of my own passions and some of the things that fuel the curiosity that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and so RBC was one of your first jobs then. Were you looking at like that path, that kind of more corporate path of things?
Yeah. Wearing a suit and tie, I thought that was the way to go. And it was there, like the opportunity was in front of me. You just realize at a certain point that the fit isn't there. So I'm thankful that I was able to learn that pretty early on. Fast forward a few years after that, I moved out to Vancouver, did as much as I could to explore the area, understand, like, the mountains were calling. I think that was the big thing. You're on the coast. It's at the time it was a burgeoning tech scene. There was a lot of inspiration to be had about what was going on south of the border and in San Francisco, let's say, even Seattle. I think that parts of that led to parts of what was going on there led to Vancouver being like really aspirational, really exciting. And I had no money in my bank account by like month 6 after moving there. So I took to Craigslist and really started to just like scrape the bottom of the barrel. It felt I was really hoping that the end result wouldn't be I have to go back home with my tail between my legs. Montreal, 5,000 kilometers away. Mom and dad are on the other side of the world, obviously worrying about their son. And you got to do what you can to make them proud and keep your head above water. And I lucked out and found a job on Craigslist. And that job was like a bilingual night shift CSR at Hootsuite. So they had just started expanding their support function. They were looking to follow the sun. So there's a team in London and then a core team in Vancouver that had morning and night shifts. So we kind of got to a 24-hour cycle that way. And I leveraged the fact that I speak French and English, and they were excited by that. They looked at my resume working at RBC and they're like, well, this guy can take care of billing stuff. That's great. And I ran with it. It led to a solid 8 years working at a company that went through all the phases you can imagine, from scrappy startup to like cash infused hyper growth, the need to expand into different territories and really find a number of different lines of business, and then parlayed that into a career as a product manager, working with development teams and any number of stakeholders to understand what people need to have built to address the problems that they're facing. And those problems typically, live and die on a computer. But when they start to creep outside the digital world and into real life, that's where things get really exciting for me.
Yeah, it's so Hootsuite is it was your start in Vancouver, and I think most people know what it is, but it's tied to social media, and I don't know how to explain it. You can explain it probably better than I can, but
it was especially early on, the CEO and founder Ryan Holmes did a good job at going to bat for his team, and also trying to carve out a niche in a space that was like, there's a lot of turnover. Everyone was building the next social network. It was always a matter of trying to be either the next Twitter or Tumblr or, LinkedIn, I think, always had its foothold in being MySpace, but with suits and ties. But the core of what Hootsuite did was it brought together a number of different channels and really positioned them as marketing channels, as communication channels, as a means of reaching your audience before I think we really had this concept of audiences. And like I said, Ryan kind of positioned it as the quote unquote social media Switzerland. It was neutral. There was a hub and spoke model where Hootsuite was the hub, and then the spokes were the different social networks. It kind of pushed the paradigm of social networks a little bit by saying YouTube is a social network, and now suddenly YouTube is a social network, 10, 15 years later. So I learned a lot there. I think that's the big thing to underscore here is it was a ride. It was a lot of fun. And it was also kind of like a crash course in like business, in understanding technology and working with technical engineering teams. So I learned so much there that I find myself applying honestly on a weekly basis these days.
Yeah, I imagined. Well, with the, I guess, the way even social media platforms and probably the adaptability that Hootsuite had to adopt almost on a constant basis with products and everything else to keep up, must have been quite the whirlwind of that. Now, what did it, as far as like, we've had this conversation a little bit, but like, what has that taught you about like the nature of social media or social interaction, and like how is it from where it kind of started, which I think is kind of where Hootsuite was like one of the first ones to get on board with like realizing how many different networks and stuff like that there were, to where we are now. And and what does any projections for where we're going in the future, or do we just all need to walk away?
I mean, so I want to caveat all of this by saying that I was fortunate to not be at the beating heart of that aspect of the business. I kind of once I forged the path that I did, I was able to stay out of that fray in particular. So the effects of social media, there's a lot to study and read up on that front. And I'd certainly recommend it if anyone is serious about understanding what we've unleashed on the world. One thing to say is that the horse has left the barn. Like, we're not going to change things. We're not going to be able to revert to the way that things were. That said, I walked into the interview for that job idealistic about the world, like really positive, really optimistic about what Hootsuite could do, what social media could do. Things have changed since then. The traction that that business initially found had a lot to do with the Arab Spring and countries literally blocking access to Twitter. So as an alternative to that, we found a different way to communicate with the outside world, and that was through Hootsuite. So there's a lot of positives that can be had there. When we look at it through the modern lens, I think that we're able to see the effects that the effects of constantly being bombarded with your own sort of output over and over and over again. I think things just start to fall in on themselves a little bit. So, I don't know if anyone's looking for clear-cut advice, but a social media detox isn't a terrible thing. Understanding that it's a tool, one of many tools, especially, is probably the way you'd want to look at it from that business perspective. Where things go next, I don't know. I'm actively trying to find hobbies and things that keep me off my computer, that have me use both my hands, and not be in front of a screen so much. So get outside and hike, find ways, get outside a cell range, and like, it's just, the world is just as enlightening when you don't have to see it through a screen. God, that sounds so cool.
It does. It's one of these conundrums each time. I'm like, the whole, the business model for stuff that I'm doing is like terminally online almost, right? And so you're just like, you feel like if you unplug from that, it's almost like unplugging from a lifeline of something. That's weird. It's this weird place we're in. Like, but some of the best times are when you're like, okay, actually nobody can get a hold of me right now, and this is a wonderful thing.
It's okay. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of rewired our brains, individually and collectively. So expectations have been shifted a little bit, but at the end of the day, if you're aware of those things, I think you're able to recognize what is in your control and what's not. I know, like, I got to take my own advice to a degree as well. Just get off your phone for everyone's sake, until you need to be on it. See, that's the eternal debate, but we're not here to solve that, are we?
I don't know. I don't know if we're going to solve that. I guess the other part of it is like tools that take you outside of, like with the hub and spoke model of like Hootsuite or something like that, where it's like, planning your posts, and also, sometimes it feels like people have all this time to post and whatnot. They're just being a lot smarter about it than some of us, I think, as well, right? Where it's like knowing it's a tool. And what social media is for that.
Yeah. And I mean, everyone's going to be able to get their voice out there, so to speak. But, personally, for one of the projects I run, podcast delivery, I spend a good chunk of my week at the onset just planning the next 7, 10, 14 days. I got it to a point, thanks to some automations that I've built, and like working in Airtable in particular, where I collect and harvest a bunch of sources that could be used for potential content. And then I, just sit in front of a queue, just a laundry list of things that I need to clean up a little bit. And then with a couple clicks, I've got visual assets tied into it. It's scheduled and ready to hit the APIs of the various social networks at the right time. So I'm using automations like that to stay above the fray, in a sense, to get away from the endless scroll that you could find yourself in. Thankfully, like, the alternative would be all consuming. You just be trapped within this sort of frame of mind where you have to be there. So, like I said, tools. So you can use those tools to get out of the way.
And so I guess, because you've been into automations probably quite a lot longer than actually many people, because I remember, I think you had like a blog post on Parabola, which some people have probably never even heard of, because it's probably one of the first ones that went to a much more enterprise, I guess, model very quickly. And then other things came, I think Make and even the Airtable automations and things like that kind of filled the gap where Parabola kind of left people. I mean, I don't know enough about Parabola, but that was like my impression because Connor Finlayson used to use it, and it just got very expensive for the level of stuff that he was trying to do with it. And so I
remember kind of circling circling around Parabola probably around the same time that Connor was. Aaron as well had been kicking the tires on it, and I didn't know either of these people. So I think the best thing that came out of trying to see if Parabola was a fit for me was friends at the end of the day, being able to tap someone on the shoulder and be like, is this working? And then I do remember Connor being like, this is just too much. I think their strength, Parabola's strength, had a lot to do with like dealing with massive like swaths of data, huge sort of I for lack of a better word, I don't even know if this is right, but like ETL functions where you're kind of extracting, transforming, and then reloading some of that data. So I certainly had to learn the language of Parabola, and that's kind of what I think it's a fair kind of comparable of like, you have to sort of wrap your head around the way that they've decided to present the information to you, and all that was fine and well. But then I found Airtable and Make, and I found a way to do things in a way that made a little more sense to me. So the flexibility, I think, it wasn't necessarily there. And then, as you say, it kind of moved up the market a little bit to serve needs that just weren't my own. Like, I was a solo individual contributor trying to figure out how to move. I think it was like stuff out of a Excel sheet or a Google sheet into Airtable of all things, or MailChimp, I think at the time. So building my own bespoke version of that became a lot more affordable for the like, and then just easier to wrap my head around and scale. That was around the time that I had launched podcast delivery with a friend, and I was scouring the internet. And this is actually how I came across, I think, Aaron's YouTube channel. And then it just opened up this world of like, well, first of all, it was like, that apartment looks like it's from my hometown. And sure enough, it was. There's something about the moldings of the door in the background, or like Montreal's notorious for hardwood floors, right? So I was like, that's a little too familiar. Sure enough, I was able to connect with Aaron on that. And then, like, I see Nelson's here, Pixel Geek. Like there were all these people just kind of like capitalizing on the fact that there are ways to do this well. So I like, honestly, I don't think I had a YouTube account before then, but then I found a YouTube account, started subscribing to channels and feeds and saving all these videos to effectively like study. And the big thing for me was like, in school, I never really had that sort of internal engine that said I should go study. It was like, I have to study. For the first time, probably in my adult life, I was like, I want to study. I want to learn this because I could see, the fruits of that labor and the effects that could have on what I'm trying to pull off. Sure enough, I ended up building a no-code referral engine, an app based out of Airtable. It was mind-numbing. It was so challenging to figure out like how to get this one referral string and what unique identifiers I need to pipe back into Airtable. But I got there. I think a year and a half later, I tore it down and built it from scratch all over again. And then, yeah, I kept moving on. I mean, Webflow was also part of that stack, if I remember right, because I foolishly I started creating individual CMS items in one collection for all of my subscribers. And I think that was well before Webflow wised up to the fact that they could monetize the CMS items the way they do now. And I scrapped that and ended up finding a janky JavaScript. Like, yeah, there's some kind of script that did a lot of the heavy lifting for me after that. So it's all a journey. It's been wild to reflect on, actually. Even for like, preparing for this chat, I was like, where did it all start? YouTube, yeah. A Parabola conversation, because they were early days, and then you're kind of just off to the races from there.
Yeah, I mean, there's the resources at our fingertips for YouTube, and the people that are putting out content like Nelson, Aaron Kornblatt, Connor Finlayson, and so many more, depending on which thing that you want to tackle, right? Like there's, things dedicated to each tool, and, as things come out, that's part of, I guess, what happens with it. So there's definitely that resource. So what was the jump from, I guess, you know, that traditional employment to like making that decision to jump to freelance? Like, there's probably a few steps in between that we haven't touched on.
In a word, COVID. Like there was a lot of pressure with the changing world. Obviously, after working at Hootsuite for 8 years, I was lucky enough to find it was an interesting gig. I worked as a product manager for a small team. We were in the fashion and design space, building software for companies that would benefit from high fidelity 3D models of their prototypes of their clothes. So every article of clothing that anyone has on starts with a prototype, and then there's all these different, you know, variants to that prototype, and oftentimes that's a physical thing. So I got a job trying to make a change on that front because there's so much waste. And again, it was kind of, you know, a little virtuous on my part, thinking I could have that big of a dent, but we wanted to have high fidelity 3D renders replace those physical prototypes. And half of that team was traditional software engineers. Half of that team were actually from the animation space. So I got to learn a ton there. And the company succeeded in its mission to a degree. We found an exit, and I had free time on my hands. At that point, I had already started dabbling in some freelance work on the side. And a friend of mine was like, just do it. You've got nothing to lose. At the time, I think I could see this now more than you know, in the moment, there was a safety net just by virtue of, you know, we were always home, spending less, having to rely on video calls and Zoom chats to catch up with friends and connect with colleagues and coworkers and stuff like that. So it kind of just seemed like an extension of that tiny attempt to get out there and find a way to, you know, experiment with those side projects. Those side projects started becoming main projects. And then when it all got serious is when I founded a sole proprietorship. And it wasn't all that challenging. I thought that there was like a lot to overcome to like get the official document set up. And now I got an email from RBC and they were like, have you heard of Owner? And then they were like, this is this one-stop shop for anyone who wants to, you know, start their small business journey. So it was a bit of a push and a pull, I'd say. The push was not necessarily having the full-time employment. Like, you know, we found an exit. Like I said, it was exciting, but it was also like, now I have the option of working with a company who's they're on the other side of the world. So that changes my day to day. Or do I sort of invest in myself? So I invested in myself to a degree, and come January, I'll think that's the the start of the fourth calendar year for this business. It's been up and down. Anyone in this space knows that it's feast or famine, but you do your best to put out a quality product, set expectations accurately. You're always thinking of that next client, but you do your best to do a good job and have people come back because they trust you.
And what is the ideal client or ideal work for you?
Well, Jeremy, like, I think we all know really the truth is anyone who's got a wallet that they're willing to open. You know, early on, it's difficult to be choosy, and I think I'd be hard pressed to find anyone who doesn't agree with that, right? Like you just want to get your footing. You want to start understanding your capability, your capacity, your throughput, how much of this you could tackle, how much of this you need to lean on other people for. Nowadays, I'm not that much choosier. You kind of build a muscle over time to like get a sense of what you're getting into before you make a full commitment. And that's something that only comes with experience. And I've got way more learning to do to really hone that in. But the ability to see something in a project or in a potential project where you're like, oh, I could learn this. Like, I've been putting this off and I've been thinking about, exploring this on my own time. But if I can now, do this research and kind of ramp up on something that I wasn't terribly familiar with as part of this project, the money's great, but then it doesn't mean as much. Like, it's money plus something else, which is fun. So that's kind of, it's kind of how I see things now. I index more on automation based projects. If I see the word Airtable in a description, or then my attention gets drawn in there. But Webflow is the other half of that coin, or the other side of that coin, I should say. And I haven't played with that nearly as much as I could. I use it for my own stuff, and it's great because I can set and meet my own expectations. But when you're working in when you're doing work for a client, you want to make sure that you can knock it out of the park, right? So I use a lot of my personal projects as a vehicle for honing those skills and really just trying to dial in on what I am good at. And then over time, you find that you have a stack, and you're like, if this project, like if the conversations to kick off this project lead to me saying anything about Airtable, Make, Webflow, Glide, I'm in a good spot.
Yeah, it's a great way of looking at it. I think never hurts to increase the toolbox of what you can do either, right? There's always this kind of fight between specialist versus generalist in this space.
Oh, for sure.
And not sure. The argument is that coming in as a generalist and being able to do a few things quite well is actually better than just one small thing. But I guess it depends on what that thing is too, right? So do you find that people are coming to you for the one thing you're really good at, or is it the generalist or the ability to solve people's problems?
It's not so tough to answer, but I'm thinking of a couple things right now, because it kind of comes down to meeting people where they're at, and using the language that they're familiar with to really make a connection, but B, communicate effectively. And that's something that I learned as a product manager, just having an array of stakeholders where you're like, okay, this person needs to understand this from a business perspective. This person would like to understand this from a technical perspective. This person, they just want the 2-minute elevator pitch, and that's that. Like, where are we at? How can we move this forward, so on and so forth. So by getting a sense of how to communicate with people, I can get into the weeds and say Airtable specific stuff about an Airtable specific project, or I can take a step back and sort of remove the specificity and say, well, we're talking about a database, and even beyond that, we're talking about a list, and simplify it to the extent that what you're saying resonates in the way that you needed to have your prospective client kind of understand what you're going after. So I don't even know if that answers the question, Jeremy, but there's keep your ear to the ground for those tiny things that tip you off to how the person you're talking to sees the world and sees the problem that they're trying to solve. Because before anything else, before inching down that path of finding a solution or making an agreement and committing to working with one another, you need to know how you're going to communicate with each other. And for me, all of that comes down to just setting the expectation, and being transparent and saying, this is how I anticipate us working. I'm flexible. Let's do this or let's do that. It is really important to make that connection early on.
Cool. We have a question here from Gregorio. I'm just going to pop it up here. Stephen O'Grady, do you have any tips for optimizing the learning experience and ensuring that the projects requiring the study of new expertise or tools are completed on time and meet their set goals?
I'm going to have to reread that. Hold on. Projects requiring the study of new expertise. So there's a couple things in here. Optimizing the learning experience. I personally, I think I would try to separate that from, unless I'm misunderstanding the question. That's one thing, and then, working with clients so that you're able to hit the right notes, meet deadlines, achieve outcomes. I think there are two ways to learn: actively and passively, and we can probably all reflect on our own experiences of that. When you sit down and you try to really understand something through and through, I think it's important to keep in mind how your mind works. So personally, I've been using Tana, and I know Penny's brought this up on a stream in the past, where you're effectively, like, you're keeping knowledge in a single spot so you could refer to it later on, and it kind of maps itself against the brain, and you grow that as a garden. There's no end goal in learning. You're just sort of actively contributing to your own understanding of something, and adding more to this massive repository of information that you could pull on when you need to. And then the passive learning, personally, the using something like YouTube and even Twitter to a degree, or some aspects or elements of social networks kind of let you passively take something in. So I'm kind of touching on gardens again. You're like, I'd love to learn how to grow root vegetables better than I am today, which, I'm not growing any, so there's nowhere but up from here. But I've got this YouTube channel that I put on, like, when I'm doing nothing, or when I'm like sitting on the couch at the end of a day's work doing even more work, I just put that on, and then it kind of seeps into your subconscious at the very least, or at least I hope that that's the case. So that's how I'd go about learning. And then when you try to relay that in projects, and like prove that you've learned something, or have the skill set to address the needs, I think it's important to understand those needs, and then make a point to kind of provide proof that you've got what it takes to get the job done. But any kind of commitment, any kind of contract I've been in, each party's taking a chance on the other. So trust. Do everything you can to establish that trust, because if the goals are laid out and the outcomes are clear, you can strive towards those outcomes and chart a course for the end result. And I think that any reasonable person is going to be accepting of the fact that something got in the way, or a deadline might be missed, because you've done your best to be transparent and communicate and set expectations or reset expectations. Candidly, anyone who's unreasonable when it comes to that is someone who you might not want to work with. I think that would demonstrate where their head's at. And one of the things that I love about freelance work is that I get to set the pace, and see. It's so much easier to draw a direct line from the work I do and the outcomes I can create. So there's no sense in stressing out over it when the critical path is often the easiest path.
I think what it ties into, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Gregorio, as part of the question is because you talked about like projects that, you can learn a new skill while doing it. And so I think that's where so you have to have, I guess, some fundamental knowledge of like, yes, I can actually achieve this or whatnot. I'm not sure if that's more along the lines of like even where the question is going as well. So like, how much of something, it's different taking a project that you're like, I don't know how to do any of this.
Yeah,
I could probably figure it out. But like, how can you, while you're learning a new skill for a project, how much do you bite off maybe, and make that decision?
So maybe it's worth clarifying. I think, as we all probably know, there are a number of ways you can achieve something. Jeremy, I know a Xano fan, and a lot of what Xano does, Airtable does, right? So there's opportunity to switch out tools entirely. I'm what I tried to touch on earlier is more about extending knowledge that you might already have. So taking a different approach while using the same tool set, or I think tactically, I'm thinking of I think a good example is like in Airtable, you could have automations. You can have everything set up so when a record enters a view, something happens. That's the trigger. Instead of going about it that way, you could actually build an interface and wire up a button to hit a webhook, and then suddenly you're doing what you were doing before, but it's that much more effective and that much more real time. So those small incremental improvements, rethinking how you're the approach that you're taking with something is really the core of what I'm getting at. Kind of challenging yourself, your past self especially. Can I build this in a more effective way? I'm familiar with it already, but is there a better way to go about this? And like I'm constantly finding those opportunities. And then you kind of go beyond that and you're like, can I use JSON or JavaScript? Can I like get into the weeds and learn the like underlying code of a make scenario, let's say, which is just JSON? And then you're like, at that point, you're just reading walls of text like it's the Matrix. But the opportunity to learn a better way is always going to be there for me. And I think that is afforded by the fact that no code is such a there's such a variety of ways that you could do things, right? Like we could sit down and use two different stacks to build identical websites at the end of the day. So that's kind of exciting to me. Hopefully that answers the question for Gregorio.
Gregorio, I guess it just means how to effectively learn new skills or tools for a project, which I think you did. You've touched on it. It's that the difference between the passive learning and then the active learning of doing it, right?
Yeah, and the headline is like knowledge gathering and YouTube.
There we go.
But also stay off social media, right? Like it's the conflict in that is funny.
That is, we keep coming back to that, right? Is like this the attention grabbing stuff. I think that is part of we feel like it's almost like part of something we have to be in touch with, but it's also this thing that pulls our attention, right?
Well, this isn't an original idea, but we exist in an attention-based economy right now. Like there's nothing more valuable than people's time and attention. So that has shaped my relationship with social media, as well as my time working closer to that beating heart than most people might. I think we've already seen, even in the last few years, what large quantities of data can be used for, and this audience probably understands that we just generate tons of data as it is, and there's always something being like there's an exhaust to our presence online. So I try to be minimalistic on the internet. Evident of the fact that you couldn't find much about me online, Jeremy, but the every once in a while I come out of this cave and then end up on the internet live. But just having the presence of mind to know that's kind of, those are the mechanics at play is it's important to me. I might have just deviated our conversation a little bit.
No, not at all. I think it's this is what the conversation is.
Yeah.
I did want to highlight, because we talked around podcast delivery, but what is the origin of that, and how did that come about? Because that's maybe not something that everybody would start doing.
Yeah, so Going back to those early days at Hootsuite, I think it was like 2014, 2015, and like we were, my team sat in like a bunker. It was like an old theater room, I think. Exposed pipes that leaked. Like there was nothing glamorous about it, but it really brought everyone together. And a friend of mine, it was his now friend of mine. It was like his first day on the job, and he's getting a tour with his onboarding buddy. And she'd known enough about me to know that I was in Montreal and he was in Montreal as well. So obviously I was a stop on that tour as he was getting eased into life at Hootsuite. So I think we had an introduction that consisted of like I don't know, a dozen syllables total between the two of us. We barely communicated in real words. And I'll tell you what it was. It was like, oh, you're from Montreal? Yeah, cool. Habs fan? Yeah, me too. Nice. End of conversation. So like our fandom of our local sports team really solidified a friendship that has like lasted and will last for the ages. We hiked the Wanda Fuca Trail together. Evan, and he ended up being the ideas guy for podcast delivery. Like years later, he comes up to me and he's like, so I've got this idea. No one out there is doing a podcast recommendation newsletter, which like it turns out that was not the case. There were at least two others that were out there. So he was like, let's just do this. He, I guess, had time on his hands, and to his credit, I don't think his brain ever stops working in that way. He's always thinking of ideas and always sort of squirreling away schemes to like, throw my way to see like, is this possible? That was a push for me to try something new. And in retrospect, it doesn't seem like it was that big of a challenge, but we spun up a Squarespace website, found MailChimp, made the most sense because at the time MailChimp was in every podcast's mid-roll, like or pre-roll for advertising. It was always the MailChimp ad, if you remember that. And it was kind of like the stars aligned a little bit. So put that together. Didn't really put much attention toward things like tone of voice, and he had a marketing brain more than I did. So it was like, he'll take care of that. I'll take care of the technical stuff. And from that point on, it just acted as this vehicle for learning, understanding, what MailChimp's API is all about, realizing how, you could take two very different platforms and have them communicate because of things like Zapier. So if it weren't for that conversation, there's a few grunts and an acknowledgement of being Montreal Canadiens fans, I don't know if I'd be sitting here right now. So it's a fun origin to reflect on. From there, it was off, like, we got to get off Squarespace because it's not doing it for us. Find Webflow, learn Webflow, understand what a CMS collection can do, figure out how to write to it, pull your hair out because the IDs that you want to reference aren't available to you. It was a confluence of just opportunity, luck, solid friendship.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it does seem to be like you've really evolved with this particular, like your personal project, podcast delivery is like the leveling up and learning new skills seems to be a lot attached to that as well, right?
Yeah, I kind of use it as a sandbox for like, if a client's like, can we pull this off? Is this possible? Can you show me an example of what this might look like? Rather than, trying to like obfuscate parts of a project that ultimately belongs to another client, and then show them a sliver of something, I could actually build out a mean prototype using, that vehicle, that sandbox. And it doesn't really have, thankfully, it doesn't really have much of an impact on like my subscriber list and getting more people in the door and acquiring subscribers that way. It's been a pretty fortuitous project to always have on. I think of it as like an evergreen kind of thing. And I don't give it nearly as much TLC as I could. Like, it takes a back seat when client opportunities show up, obviously.
Yeah, but I think it's coming from personal experience with like building something of your own, that you can do that. You can explain it. I built this thing, and this is how these kind of things work, and you can show the whole back end because it does belong to you. Makes a huge kind of difference in like, this is how we can execute this for you because I've already done it, is a very good way of being able to do that. I want to pull in Maggie and Penny because we haven't touched on gardening or any of these other stuff. So, we could just go on, I'm sure, for a very long time anyway. Yeah, let's pull Maggie and Penny back in. And if you have any other questions in the chat, now is your time to post them.
So let's talk about gardening then, because that's obviously one of those things that gets you outside. So
yeah.
Yeah. So have you got a garden right now, or is that just something you're planning for the future?
It is. There are two ways to answer that question, I think. I do. It's empty. We just kind of, you show up here at the right time of the year, and like maybe you can eke something out of it and get some winter crop down. But we needed tools. That's, you kind of. I didn't need rakes and shovels living in a Vancouver apartment. So we got that settled. I think part of, the plan here is to similar to what I was just describing, use this as a bit of a test bed, so to speak, and experiment, try things. The other day I was cutting a cucumber, and I was like, I can save these seeds. I might not like grow anything out of them, but the attempt, having the opportunity to make that attempt is something I value. So now I'm harvesting and drying seeds. The thing that got me into this, I think, more than anything was a Kickstarter, believe it or not. There was the brand Click and Grow, those like home gardens that you could set up.
Okay, yeah.
And you've got your own UV spectrum lights and everything. And so I found one of their like V2 model, which looked, it wasn't like a plastic orb, which was nice. It's like wood and black finish and everything. Kind of, it spoke to me enough to buy in on it. And then it shows up at my door, and it's massive. It's like, it's probably about this big, and it can yield a ton of herbs, but you obviously have to, progress through that and keep on top of it. And I did, and then I wouldn't, like, I'd go back and forth on it. So I think what I realized is that it's good for herbs more than anything else to have on hand and keep close to the kitchen, so that you can go get, basil or oregano or something along those lines. The tomatoes, like anything that bears fruit, was a little challenging because it's like it's a hydroponic grow system. So all the roots live in, there's no like media, there's nothing, no soil.
Right.
So it's, if I take the little soil pod out, I kind of have to rip all the roots off, and transplanting it's just not possible.
Right.
So I might try that and see if anything sticks come spring or like late spring, early summer. But the bigger plan, and part of the reason why we moved to the interior, was getting a farm plan together, and trying to work with local government bodies to prove that we can sort of build a home and have a homestead, and really lean into the things that, like I said earlier, take me away from the screen and off my computer. To see the literal fruits of your labor is just like, that's one of the most remarkable things that any human being can experience. And that goes as far as to like harvesting honey from the bee farm and the apiary that we're trying to get up, as well as like the we got tons of like squash, obviously, but it's like night and day. It's entirely different from anything I could learn and see through working online.
It is extremely different. And I totally agree with the whole being able to go out and, harvest something that you've grown yourself. There's something that is so special about being able to do that. So
Yeah,
I applaud you.
yeah. I mean,
And you've picked a great place to do it. When I was growing up near Banff, we spent every summer we would go down to the Kelowna area and bring back just like a trailer full of fruit and vegetables and stuff. So you've certainly got a good place to be trying to build all of that.
it's pretty remarkable. I've been coming back and forth for years now. To not have to do that, to not have to do that drive, especially, is fun. But to be settled in here and experience the changing of the seasons and like understanding, understanding the trends and like reading the land is going to be one thing. I grew up mostly in the city, so I might be a little illiterate when it comes to reading the land, but to help that along, and I kind of touched on this earlier with Maggie, I think it was like, maybe we can throw some tech into the ground as well and get like soil moisture monitors and like understand whether or not I should run the sprinkler and stuff like that. So it's, despite my best efforts to not be connected, it's still kind of drawing me in to scenarios where I'm like, how do I get tech in the ground or tech outside the home so that I'm just doing a better job?
You can have a little stream deck that's connected to your sprinkler and you just like press buttons and things start watering. And
I mean, I could do that. Everything's kind of virtual. I'm using I got sucked into the Apple ecosystem many years ago, and it is kind of hard to leave. Even their HomeKit app is or their home app is not great. The HomeKit ecosystem could do better, but Homebridge, which is open source, it allows you to link up other devices to your Apple Home, despite them not being fully authorized for that. And Home Assistant is another version of that as well. Basically, I'm running a server in my basement, and I've got all these virtual buttons that I can turn on or off based on rules, which is kind of cool. So I could quite literally, like, I don't even need the Stream Deck. I could just let the rain happen, and then it turns off my sprinkler, or tap into the local forecasts and realize that it won't be raining for the next 14 days. So I should run the sprinkler. I'm very much about the like set it and forget it aspect of that. Yeah. And it is all a work in progress. I think it'll always be a work in progress.
It is.
It's also led me down the path of I fancy myself a amateur network sysadmin now, where I'm just building a home network with equipment, like enterprise grade equipment, where you're like, this is plenty, right? Like I need the power of a small business in my home so that I can make sure that my
hydroponic tomatoes get watered.
Exactly.
If your kitchen's big, those things grow fast. Like, ready for a jungle. I grew some cherry tomatoes last year, and it just took over an entire side of the garden. I was not expecting it.
It's I mean, but the yield at the end of the day, it's so much better than the tomatoes that you can buy at the store.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know. My kid just steals them also. I see none of those. My kid like zero. It's on her stomach.
My dog has now, she loves beans, like green beans, and it's just so bizarre. And she'll like break into the garden to get them.
Oh no. Dear. Well, they do say there is nothing so optimistic as a gardener. So always you will start to learn that there's always next year, because things,
thankfully,
all the great plans and whatnot, and life comes along, and then it's like, but there's always next year. It's okay.
It does. It's an exercise in patience and acceptance. Totally. Thankfully, I'm not. I don't think we're at the point where we're tying our well-being to this, but I say that I wouldn't be able to do it if I had a full-time 9 to 5, like working in this capacity means that I can step away when I need to, avoid the crowds, I don't know what rush hour is anymore, which is nice.
Mm.
But the goal for me has always been to create that balancing act where, 40-hour work weeks, I guess that's standard to some people. Hopefully, everyone realizes that you need time outside of those 40 hours, or like having your own, like just making your own choices is probably the best for everyone. That's kind of what I believe. But until we all, until employers get there, this is doing me quite well, where I'm working maybe 20, 30 hours a week at odd hours, sometimes, like between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. But that doesn't really do me well when I have to wake up at 6, and as the sun's coming up to get out in the garden and do all those other things. So I mentioned earlier, I'm still finding my rhythm of this place, but the goal is to really like take the time that I would otherwise be allocating to that traditional job where you're worst case scenario chained to a desk. Take that time that I've now gained and put it towards something that can pay dividends in other ways.
The conclusion of this
friends.
podcast, but if you need automations or vegetables, Steven's your guy.
Absolutely.
Give me some time. I might have a Shopify store up for like massive amounts of zucchinis and tomatoes next summer.
Maybe this is a good place to end the.
We have to. This could just go on. I feel like we could just continue this ad infinitum. Unfortunately, we are at like over our hour, so we do want to thank you, Steven, for coming and sharing your time with us. What's the best way of people finding you online?
Twitter. I refuse to call it X because it just doesn't make sense in English language. Like, find me on Twitter at original. You can DM me there, or my website, sogrady.com. It's honestly, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the stream. I like your lineup for November is nuts. I'm honored to be amongst the crowd that you got coming in. So, it's if anyone wants to reach out, I'm an open book, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this month. And thanks for everything you guys do. This is great.
Terrific.
Well, thanks for coming. Yeah, it's been busy. It's been busy. We're starting to maybe talk about even expanding a bit the team, but we'll more on that later, maybe. For now, this brings us to the end of our 20th Northern Showcase already. Wow. We'd like to thank you all for joining us and remind you to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And join us in the lodge and in person for upcoming events. We have no upcoming in-person events, but we definitely have quite a number coming up this month. Next Friday, November 8th, we're having a Glide workshop with Andy Claremont from Glide. November 15th, we'll be having a Visual Electric workshop with Grace Walker. That was actually requested, which was great to see. And November 29th, here on YouTube, our last Northern Showcase of the year with Josh Lowe, who has been with us in the chat today. So visit our website at nocodenorth.com and sign up for our mailing list to receive all of our latest updates. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And join us on Fridays in the lodge, our cool gather space. And our lodge hangouts are open to everyone. So please join us. And until next time, bye.